Okay, so in this video, I'm going to walk you through kind of a more in-depth version of building an AI, OpenAI assistant. And it's going to leverage a few other technologies and kind of show you how you might build something like this for kind of a real-world style application. And I've chosen Voiceflow and I've chosen AWS as the two main tools that I want to demonstrate this with. Voiceflow is a really nice front end for building chat applications. There's actually a lot of overlap between Voiceflow and OpenAI, and definitely encourage you to learn more about it. It's very, very powerful, very flexible. But we're going to leverage that to provide us the front end and more of the glue code to tie back together to AWS. And then on the AWS side is kind of you've got basically the keys of the kingdom if you use AWS. We're going to use the serverless services such as API Gateway, AWS Lambda, and Amazon DynamoDB for storage as part of this demonstration. Serverless simply means that you can build all this stuff in AWS. You don't have to worry about servers or provisioning servers or any of that. Everything is serverless. Hence the name serverless, meaning there's no actual servers you maintain. It's all maintained by AWS itself. But there's a lot of other services that go under that umbrella. DynamoDB is just a nice one because it is a way to store data. But there's also RDS if you want to do like a Postgres style or some other relational database. You can obviously use that. And then there's other services such as SQS, SNS, and other things that allow you to really kind of branch out and build really feature-rich applications that can both answer questions and or tie back into a large language model and show you kind of how to do that. And then obviously everything's going to tie back to an OpenAI assistant. Okay, that's what we're going to build. And that's the architecture that we're going to demonstrate. What's it going to look like at the end is something that is showing you how to show you this on an actual web page itself. And let me show you what that would look like. So here is a sample WordPress website. Just a really simple one. I just chose a style, and we actually walk you through building this as well. And on this page is going to be a chat that you've obviously seen on a bunch of different websites. That's what Voiceflow allows us to do, is provide this interface, really simple to add in, really just a few lines of script code that you add in that it generates for us. And then the actual conversation that you have here is actually tying all the way back to an actual OpenAI assistant, and it's leveraging AWS as kind of the glue to bring everything together. And again, because you have the power of a large language model, you can ask it questions and it can decide whether or not it can answer the question, or whether it can use your retrieval knowledge base, or even if it has to actually access your specific function calls to have you go tell it information. For example, in the case of this application, we have functions that will allow us to actually book a reservation and store it to a DynamoDB table, as well as a function that will actually retrieve the cost of a vacation home for a week, just to simulate this. So the data you see here is all coming from our knowledge base, and then obviously I'm asking it to go ahead and book a reservation, and it's providing me the conversation back, making sure that I provide all the details, and then at the end of the day, it's actually going to book a reservation all the way back to a DynamoDB table, and we're going to show you that. So that's what we're building. And that's what we're going to kind of demonstrate how you can pull this off and how you can pull all these together. So stick around if you want to learn how to do this. So here's the architecture that we are going to build upon here for this demonstration. So you're going to need to have three pieces that you'll have to have connectivity to. First off is we're going to be using Voiceflow, and I'm going to provide links to all of these in the description of the video. So you'll have to have a Voiceflow account, and you can sign up for that. There's a free trial for that. You also need to have an account on AWS Web Services, so you can sign up again for a free. It's also a free tier available for that. And then finally, you're going to have to sign up for the OpenAI API, and that's different than ChatGPT. So you're going to actually have to sign up for an OpenAI account, and then once you do that, you'll have to pay a little bit to run the OpenAI assistant. APIs, but it's very, very inexpensive, and we're actually going to use a cheaper model that's even going to make it even less expensive. We're talking pennies to run some of these, and in some cases, portions of a penny, not even a single penny, to run some of these different commands. But again, there's more expensive models that will give you a different result, and I'll show you the difference as we go through this. Okay, so using the links, make sure you sign up for Voiceflow, make sure you have an AWS account, and make sure you have an account on OpenAI website. All the links will be provided. So architecturally, this is how it's going to work. So we want to provide the front end to the user. They're going to have a web page, and the web page is going to have a component, a Voiceflow component, and we'll show you how to add that on there. And then from that Voiceflow component, it's going to talk to AWS through something called API Gateway. That is going to allow us to make RESTful API calls. And then from there, we're going to be calling AWS Lambda functions. And this is where the heavy lifting is going to actually be. This is what's going to communicate back and forth between the OpenAI APIs and back through to our application. Voiceflow is going to talk to API Gateway, and then API Gateway is going to then communicate with our Lambda functions. And then from there, we're going to talk to the OpenAI assistants, as well as, in our case, the demonstration is going to show you how to save data to an Amazon DynamoDB database. Okay, so the reason also, I'll just kind of point out here, there's actually 2 Lambda functions we're going to create. And again, those are all provided in the GitHub repo. The reason we're doing this is we want to split this into 2 different pieces. What we want to happen is when you make a call to the API gateway, it's a best practice to not let it sit there and spin. And in some of the cases with OpenAI, the API itself, we have to wait for the request to come back. I cover a lot of this in my demos, in my other videos where we cover the OpenAI assistants themselves, but definitely refer back to those for the details. But there is essentially going to be a process that's going to be waiting for OpenAI to come back with a result, and that could take several minutes for that to come back. So we don't want this RESTful call to wait that amount of time. It's really not a good practice. So what I did is split this up into 2 separate functions, and I'll show you how that works to make it so that the request will come in, it will then kick the Lambda function off, and then call another Lambda function, which will actually wait for the request to be fulfilled from there and do whatever it needs to do with our different services within AWS. All right, first thing is we're going to go ahead and create our assistant. So I have my empty assistants page here on the OpenAI website. I'm going to then, now I could do it right from here. I could do create and run through it this way, but I'm going to use my Juniper notebook here, Collab notebook that will do this programmatically, just so you can kind of see how it's done. So essentially we're going to run through this. We're going to call the API itself. And again, all this is covered in my other videos. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on what this is doing, but we're essentially going to be creating our assistants through their API. Now, the one thing we have to do here is we have to upload our knowledge base of files. So in our case, I have a single file that I'm going to use that has the data for our vacation homes. And that file is nothing more than just a PDF, and it just has some data that we're going to be using, and we're going to be using it to demonstrate accessing data about various homes. And it's got the name of the home, it's got the ratings, it's got a brief description of the home, how many bedrooms it has, how many bathrooms it has, how many people it'll sleep, and some other details. So I have that for a couple of homes here, of 10 homes that it can then use. So essentially this will be the pool of homes that we will be talking to the user about and trying to get them to decide on renting a home from this list. And what we have to do is go ahead and upload that file. So I'm going to come over here to my folders here, and I'm going to call make directory, just create a data directory and refresh it here. And I'm actually going to put that file in here. I'm just going to go ahead and upload that. Okay, so I have now uploaded that file, Vacation Homes PDF. And again, that's also in the GitHub repo, so you have that as an example. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create that file on OpenAI and get back a unique file ID. So I can now run this and get the file list itself. So here is the file that I created. So within the assistance page, you'll see under files, you'll see various files here. I've done this a few times. You'll see the files here, and here's the one I just created just now. So it essentially has a unique ID for it. and that's actually the same ID that we're talking about. All right. This is also going to have two private functions that we're going to use. Now, again, remember how functions work. When we want to have the OpenAI call us and let us provide the data for unique things we want our assistant to do, we provide a function. So I'm going to create two functions. One is going to be simulating booking a reservation, which essentially is going to take a bunch of data that the user gives us and eventually store it into our DynamoDB table after via that Lambda function that we'll talk about in a little bit. But essentially, this is the book reservation function. Let me make sure I create my private functions here, my tools object, and let's go ahead and put the reservation in there. So that's just the function we're going to use anytime someone wants to book a reservation. It's going to take the person's name, phone, the house ID, the date of check-in, and the number of nights. And we're going to go ahead and append that to our tools. And then we're also going to do one more, and this is going to be used to simulate getting the cost of a home. So essentially by providing a house ID, which is going to be a unique identifier, we're then going to call this function and it's going to return back the amount, the cost for that house based on the number of nights that the user has specified or that the engine provided to us. All right, so there's all of our tools. All right, so that's my two functions. Now, having created the files and created two functions, the last step is to actually create the assistant. And here's where you put your instructions. This is my set of instructions that I'm going to be using to communicate back and forth through our chat module. Now, these are going to be things you'll have to tweak to get them right. I just kind of showed you a demonstration of how it works, essentially so that the assistant knows how to behave and what it's supposed to do. So this is my example for that. And again, feel free to change this however it makes sense for your specific use case. All right, go ahead and create that assistant. And there's my assistant ID. Now that I have that, I can go ahead and run this command here and see that it's actually been created. I can also go over to the assistance page here and see the details for the assistant. So here's my two functions. I also have retrieval turned on for this, and that's going to be using our single file here, Vacation Homes PDF. So this is my assistant. Now what we have to do is we need to take this assistant and we need to hook it into our AWS component. So far what we've done is we've created this piece. So we have the assistant over here. We now need to tie these together and build out the AWS components. All right, and we're going to do that in a couple steps. First thing we're going to do is we're going to create the Lambda functions, and then we're going to hook those Lambda functions to the API gateway so that we can then communicate back and forth within Voiceflow. So here I am on the AWS Lambda page, and we're going to create two functions. All right, so let's go ahead and create our first function, and we're going to choose author from scratch. We're going to build this from scratch, and we're going to call this one Open AI Proxy, and then we're going to choose Python. So we're going to use Python for this example. You can obviously use a different language if you prefer. Python seems to be the best one, to be honest. It's the one that's most popular. So I'm going to choose Python 3.10. I'm going to choose that runtime, and the reason for that is because we're going to be using OpenAI packages or what are called layers and dependencies. So I want to choose that. That's what everything is built on. But you can obviously choose different ones depending on your specific use case. I'm going to leave all this the same. I'm not going to change anything else. I'm going to go ahead and create this function. And let that do its thing. All right. Okay, so we have to then go ahead and there's a lot of things on this page, right? A lot of things going on here. First thing is we need to actually go to the code itself. All right, so we are going to use our code source page here. I'm going to delete all of the boilerplate function logic that was provided, and I'm going to use the code that we have on our GitHub repo. All right, so here I am in the GitHub repo. I'm going to go down and I'm going to pick the OpenAI handler. I'm going to copy the raw file contents. Be sure you're picking this one, the OpenAI handler Lambda Pi. copy the contents, and back in here, we're going to go ahead and paste that in. All right, that's all of the contents and the logic for the one Python function. And just to follow along, we're actually creating this function here. So this is the function that's going to talk to API Gateway. So that's the proxy. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the code here just to kind of set the stage of what's going on. So if you scroll to the very bottom here is going to be this function. That's the actual entry point of what OpenAI, or what the API Gateway is going to call. It's going to pass in all the details. It's also going to pass in whether it's a GET request or a POST request and our endpoint. Very important to pay attention to the resources being used and the method. We have 3 endpoints that we're going to write. There's going to be a one to start a new thread. That's what the purpose of this function is to start a brand new conversation or thread and return back that thread ID. And then we're going to have 2 additional POST methods that are going to be used to control the chat, to both ask a question and then later on wait and see if we get a response back. So that's the purpose of the /chat endpoint, and also the purpose of the /message is to go and check and see if we got a message back or not. Okay, so those are the 3 endpoints that we're going to eventually have exposed through API Gateway. Okay, so the purpose of this function is to handle all of that. There's some other functions in here that are part of that. Real quick, I'll talk about what they are. Starting a new conversation or a new thread is what gets called here for that function. When we want to retrieve the status of a message, whether or not it's actually completed or not, that's the purpose of that particular function. And then starting a new chat is when we want to invoke our second function that's actually going to loop through and check for completion and talk to OpenAI to get us the function calls and other details that are necessary. All that heavy lifting with regard to that is all going to be invoked through a second function. Okay, and that's the purpose of this chat. Is when you start a chat, it's going to essentially create that second call to the second Lambda function and wait for the response to come back. But in return, this function is going to return back immediately with the result. So we won't be waiting around. Okay. That's basically in a nutshell kind of what the purpose of this function is. There are 3 environment variables that we need to have within our application. All right, we're going to have the API key itself. We need to have the ID for the assistant, and then we also have to have something called an ARN that points at our Lambda handler, the second function. So that ARN is essentially is telling this Lambda function how to get to this second ARN function. ARN is simply the resource, how you can get to the actual AWS resources through that ARN. Okay, that's kind of a unique identifier to get to it. Okay, so we need to add these environment variables into our function, and the way we do that is go into configuration, go down to environment variables, click edit, and add each one of those in. The first thing we're going to add is going to be our OpenAI key. Okay, and you can retrieve the OpenAI key from the website, or you can get to it from the other places where you may have stored it. So again, you're going to need that to get that from the website. All right, I'm going to go ahead and paste my API key in, and I'm going to add another environment variable. This environment variable is going to be for the assistant ID. Okay, you can get the assistant ID directly from your code, or in my case, I'm just going to get it right from the assistant's page within OpenAI itself. And I'm going to go ahead and paste that in there. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create I'm going to duplicate this tab, and I'm actually going to create my second function. So I'm going to create a brand new function, and the reason I'm going to do that is because I want to get the ARN that I can store. So open up a second tab, go to create function, again, author from scratch, and we're going to call this one booking agent. or handler. We'll call it handler, booking handler. Doesn't matter what you call it. All right, again, this is going to be Python 3.10 again. We're going to leave the permissions the same. We'll come back and talk more about permissions in a moment. I'll leave that there. Let me go ahead and create this function. All right, once it's been created, you're going to want to look at this function array in here. You're going to copy this. And this is the array that we're going to paste into our third environment variable, which is going to be lambda handler array. Go ahead and paste that in there. And that's it for those environment variables. Actually, I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to take the same Open API key, and I am going to create the same environment variable in the second handler the same exact way. I don't need any other handler, but we definitely need this one. Environment variables are tied to a specific Lambda function. Again, there's other ways you can store this. There's other ways to store secrets in AWS, but this is the most convenient way. So I'm just going to create this here, and I'm going to call this an Open AI API key again. All right. I'm going to go over here to the code for the second function. I'm going to get rid of all the boilerplate, and I'm going to go back into my repo, and I'm going to pick the booking lambda exactly the same way, copy the raw file here, and I'm going to go ahead and paste that in as my code. And then this one here is the function that's going to do a couple things. One is going to be used to handle the function calls. If you remember from our other videos, and what I did here earlier is I created two functions for getting the cost and also one for booking a reservation. So this is what's going to get called anytime OpenAI says, hey, I need you to give me this detail, like the cost, or I want you to go ahead and book this reservation. It's going to call this function. Okay, and then I have specific functions in here to actually do the storage itself to the DynamoDB table. We actually have to create a reservations table. We'll do that in a moment. But that's actually going to store that whatever data comes back from the large language model is going to get stored there. And also the Lambda handler, again, this is the entry point. So that first function is going to call this function, which is then going to simply do the loop. It's going to wait and check the status, and it's going to keep looping until it gets either the word completed back from status or failed, or if it needs to use one of our functions, it's going to call this function called handle action, which is essentially what I showed you earlier. I'm just going to call this function. So handle action is going to decide, hey, what am I supposed to do? Am I getting the cost? Am I going to book a reservation? Or any other things you needed to do? This is how you plug in your functions back into the whole architecture. All right, so it's going to go ahead and loop and sleep until eventually it breaks out of this loop. Okay. So a couple things we have to do in order to make this all work is we need to first off, we need to provide permissions. And then secondly, we need to add in support to handle OpenAI itself. So Lambda doesn't know how to doesn't know anything about the OpenAI library. So normally within Python, you would do a pip install, right? So you can't really do that as easily in this architecture. So what you have to do is you need to provide what are called deployment packages or layers, all right? And that does exactly the same thing. So the function will then use those layers to go get whatever dependencies that you need. So we have provided that as well. All right, so in the repo, you're going to see this zip file here. That is actually going to be a packaged up dependencies for OpenAI. So it's simply essentially the same thing as doing a pip install of OpenAI, and whatever dependencies OpenAI needed, it's all been zipped up, and we can then take that zip file and create what is called a layer. And just to kind of show you how layers work, if you go to the Lambda page itself, you can just click on layers, and here's where you would add that layer. I've already done it for OpenAI, so it's already there for me. But if you don't have it, which you won't, you're going to take that zip file You're going to give it whatever name you want to call it, OpenAI. You're going to upload that zip file, and you're going to make sure you provide the correct runtime. For our case, it's going to be Python 3.10. And if you do that correctly and save it, you're going to see the OpenAI layer, whatever you want to call it, here on the layers. Then in order to tie this back into your Lambda functions, you need to go back into your Lambda function. Okay, so here I am in my OpenAI proxy Lambda function. You need to go down into code, scroll all the way to the bottom. You need to add a layer, and you need to add a custom layer, and you need to pick the OpenAI layer and add that. And make sure you pick a version. There you go. Okay, and you can kind of see that layers there. So now this function, when it tries to import OpenAI, it'll have access to it through that layer. All right, you'll have to do the same thing on your other function. So within booking handler, do the same thing, go down to code, go down to the bottom, add layer, pick custom layer, pick OpenAI, and pick whatever version shows up for you. And you'll see that layer there. So very important, if you don't do that, then any OpenAI calls are not going to work because it's not going to know how to access those particular libraries. All right, so we need to set up a couple more permissions. We need to give permission so that this function can call this function. And we also need to give permission so that this function can access the DynamoDB table. So by default within AWS, resources are restricted unless you actually explicitly add them in as something you have access to. Okay, so we have to do that through permissions. And then we also need to create the actual DynamoDB table itself. So let's go ahead and create the DynamoDB table and then go ahead and set the permissions up for both of these correctly. Okay, so here I am on the Amazon DynamoDB page. I'm going to go to tables and I'm going to go ahead and create a table. And I'm going to call it reservations. And I'm going to give it a partition key called reservation ID. All right, and leave all that the same. I'm going to leave all these details. We're not going to really spend a lot of time on this. More so just to create, we're just going to demonstrate being able to store the data. All right, so this is my reservations table. And in order for my Lambda function to call this, I need to then make sure that I give permissions. So the way to do that is similar to what we did with the Lambda handler ARN. We need to get the ARN for the reservations table. And the way you do that is by clicking on the actual table, clicking on additional information, come down here, copy that to the clipboard. So that's the ARN for the DynamoDB table. And we're going to go back into our booking handler. And we're going to go to permissions. And the way we do that is going through configuration, click on permissions. You're going to click on the role name. And you're going to go down and click create an inline policy. And you can do this in many different ways. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the security side of it. But we're going to pick that DynamoDB service. And we're going to go ahead and just allow all actions. And we're going to come down here to where it says table. And we want to restrict this to just our ARN. So just go ahead and paste in your reservations table, add the ARN. And that'll give us restricted access for this function to only talk to our reservations table. Let's go ahead and hit next. And I'm going to call this reservations access, create it, and there it is. So this policy is now tied to our Lambda function, and it has access to invoke Lambda functions as well as be able to access the reservations table. Okay. Last is we're going to go into the booking handler, and we're going to do something similar. We're going to go down to permissions again. I'm sorry, we're going to do this in the OpenAI proxy. My apologies. We're going to go to the OpenAI proxy. configuration permissions. And in this case, what we want to do is we want to make sure that this function can call the booking handler, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to open up that proxy role. It's very similar to what we did before. You're going to add permissions, create a line policy, and this time we're going to call Lambda. All Lambda functions, and we're going to scroll down, and we're going to have it to be restricted to just a single function. So we're going to click Add ARN, and we're going to go back to our booking handler, and we're going to go to the function ARN here, copy that to the clipboard, and we're going to go ahead and paste that in. Add the ARN. Click Next. Just give it a policy name, create the policy, and we're done. Okay. So at this point, our entire Lambda capability has already been set. Next is we will then hook this back into our API gateway. We'll do that next. All right, so within the Amazon API gateway page, here's where we're going to create the new API. So we're going to come down here and choose REST API and choose new API there. We're going to call this one booking agent. Leave that the same. I am going to create a new resource here, and I'm going to call this one start. And we're going to go down here to that, create a new method. And it's going to be a GET request tied to a Lambda function. I'm going to make sure I turn on proxy integration so all of the details are flowed through to our Lambda function. And I'm going to choose my OpenAI proxy function we created earlier. I'm going to leave all that the same. Okay. I'm going to go back to the top here, and I'm going to do this again. Again, I'm going to do this one as chat. And we're going to create a new method here. And it's going to be, again, the same thing. This one's going to be a post. We're going to turn on proxy integration. We're going to use that same OpenAI proxy and leave that the same. And then I'm going to do that one more time. And this one's going to be message. Leave that the same there. Go ahead and create a method. This one's also going to be a post. Lambda function, turn on proxy integration, and OpenAI proxy. All right, so your screen should look like what you see there. You should have 3 endpoints, a get on start, a post on message, and a post on chat. Those are the 3 endpoints that we're going to be using within our VoiceFlow application. Before we move over to VoiceFlow, we need to deploy the API. So we're going to deploy here, we're going to pick new stage, and I'm going to call this V1. Leave that the same. Okay, and so that's been deployed. Now, this invoke URL is important. You're going to need to copy this and make sure you hold on to that. So you're going to need that when we go over to VoiceFlow in a moment. Okay, what I did was prior to going into VoiceFlow, I'm using Postman to just test out our endpoint. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the endpoint that you got from API Gateway. You're going to paste it into here as a GET request. Okay, just like I did here, I'm going to paste that in there and just make sure that you put a slash, and we're going to try the start endpoint. And remember, that's a GET request. So what should come back is you should get back a thread ID. If you get that far, if you get back a thread ID, then you know your API gateway is configured correctly, and you know that it's invoking your OpenAI proxy correctly. So at this point, we have hopefully our AWS cloud working correctly. It's talking to our API gateway and our OpenAI assistant. And then eventually we're going to be using this function here to invoke some calls to actually store some data out there. We're going to be using Voiceflow. So that's the next step, is we're going to go ahead and use the template that we have created for you. You can retrieve that template from here as well. It's also been part of the Git repo. So you're going to want to download that file. You're going to want to go into Voiceflow. So over in Voiceflow, you're going to want to then import that VF file. Once you have it imported, this is what the template will look like. So here's the way it's going to work: is when requests come in here, it's going to invoke our APIs. You'll see there's a GET request here to create a thread. There is another one over here to generate a response, and then a final one for checking the response. All right. So again, to make it simple, I just provided this. Again, there's a lot of things you can do within Voiceflow, but to keep it somewhat simple, I'm just going to show you what you need to change. In order to make this work, we need to make 3 changes. So you're going to come into here, the first one, and replace everything except for the /start with the endpoint we received from OpenAI Gateway earlier. So you're going to take this URL, copy that to the clipboard, and you're going to paste that in here. Remember to keep the /start. And you can do that 2 more times. You're going to come over here to the post, and you're going to then delete everything out except for the /chat. And then finally, you do it 1 more time. Leave everything there. Okay. And let's test it out. Those are the only 3 changes you need to make. In order to test it, we're going to test it right here. We're going to hit start. Okay, so let's just see if we're getting access to our data. So, do you have any homes to rent? Question. Okay, so I got an error. So let's go ahead and try to debug this error. So it looked like whenever it made the request here, it got an error on the request. So the way we're going to debug this is we're going to do that using our Lambda function itself. So go back to your Lambda function. So what I'm going to do is, when I made that call, it should have invoked this function here. Let's just check the logs for this function, and then we're going to check the logs for the other one. So first off, let's go to the monitor. Go down to View CloudWatch Logs. And let's click on Log Stream, and let's see if we've got any errors here. So we got a failed status. So sometimes these will fail, and that is a common thing that you get. So this run status actually came back from OpenAI itself. So it failed for whatever reason. And this is something that does happen. It's just the nature of some of these, because again, these are still beta. So it looks to me like this failed because of something on the OpenAI side. It doesn't necessarily look like anything that we broke. So I'm going to go back into Voiceflow, and I am going to go back to the start again. And let's run it 1 more time. And I'll say I want to rent a house. Yeah, great. So that worked that time. So yeah, the last time it looked like it was just an OpenAI call, something failed on their end. But if you get this far, if you get a message that actually shows you some text here, then all 3 of our endpoints are working correctly. Okay, so we at least know that the OpenAI is working. We know that the API gateway is working, and we know that our 2 Lambda functions are properly configured as well. All right, so let's go ahead and just kind of ask it some questions. Let's see if we can get it to actually book one of the homes. So I'm going to go ahead and pick some details. I want a home that sleeps 10 for let's say 10 people for 1/1/2024 for 7 nights. And let's see what it says here. Okay, so it looks like it found a home. It's telling me the cost of the home. Let's go ahead and book this one. Okay, there you go. So it booked it. So I got my reservation number. So it booked DCL 1001 for 7 nights, total cost $700, and it gave me a reservation ID. So by looking at this, I can tell that it actually did look like it actually saved it into my DynamoDB table. Let's double check. So here I am in my reservations table. I'm going to click on Explore Table Items. And I'm going to see, sure enough, there it is. There is my home, DCL 101. Now, a couple things. It didn't ask me for my full name. So, and it didn't ask me for my phone number. It's supposed to. Now, this is one of those things that you will run into with some of this large language model. You have to really work on getting the prompts correct. So even though I asked it to, if you go back to my sample here, let's go back and scroll down to my instructions. So these are the instructions I gave it. I told it to go ahead and ask for all the details. Make sure they tell you the data check-in, house number. Let's see what it says here. Cleaning, pets. So we probably need to give it some better details, right? So this is part of the nature of this, is getting these right. I also am using the Chat GPT 3.5 Turbo version. If I use the 4.0 version of the model, then I'd probably get a better response, but it's more expensive, right? So this is a trade-off with that. But the good news is everything is working correctly, and I can now tweak these however I need to. I can actually even do them from within the assistant itself, just tweak the instruction to get it to work correctly. Okay, but now I have my application that is talking through my assistant. It's communicating into AWS. It's then invoking functions within AWS, and here's where you can do anything you can think of, right? I can call SQS calls, put in message queues. I can do SNS. I can notify myself through emails. You have access to all of the services that are available within AWS simply by following this particular architecture. Okay. The last step we have to do is let's go ahead and put this actually onto a web page. So here I have got a simple WordPress website. There's nothing special with this one. This is just an out of the box WordPress website that I have configured. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to add that VoiceFlow component onto WordPress. So first thing, let's go ahead and come to Appearance and let's go to Themes. I'm going to add a new theme here, and I'm just going to pick a travel one. Just search for travel. And see if I thought it looks good here. This looks pretty good. I'm going to pick this one. And I'm going to go ahead and install that. Just so we have something that looks nice. And I'm going to go ahead and view that web page. It looks pretty good, right? All right, so what I want to do is I'm going to put that VoiceFlow component onto here. All right, and when I'm going to do that, I'm going to go back over to VoiceFlow. And within VoiceFlow, I'm going to come to Publish, and I'm going to click Publish. And you're going to get a prompt. Once you publish it, you're going to get a prompt that allows you to embed the widget. And click that option there, and it'll give you the details. And here I've kind of already styled this a little bit. Deep Creek Vacations, I've given some details here. You can style this however you want it to look. The most important thing here is this portion here, this bit of script. You want to copy that. This is what we're going to put onto our WordPress site. All right. Once you have that copied, head back over to your WordPress dashboard, and you're going to add in a plugin. You're going to select Add New Plugin, and you're going to type in WP Code, and you're going to install that. activate it. Once you've installed that plugin, you're going to go to Install Plugins, and you're going to choose the code snippets, and you're going to come down to Header and Footer, scroll down to Footer, and right click and paste. Paste that script that you got from Voiceflow. Go ahead and save it. Once you've saved changes, you can go back to the site, and sure enough, there it is. There's our plugin. Let's go ahead and start a new chat. Tell me about your homes. Well, it didn't exactly work like I expected. It gave me some information here, but again, probably by tweaking the prompts and trying a different model. Let me try this. Let me go back over into my API assistant, and let's see if I can change the model to be a newer version. Let's see how that works. So within my assistant here, I'm going to go ahead and edit this. I'm going to switch it from 3.5 Turbo 1.6 to GPT-4. Let's go ahead and save that. And that's the only thing I have to change. I don't have to change anything else within my application. If it should now start using that new model. Okay, so go back over here. Let's try it with the new model, see if it works any different. And let's see if this works any differently. Maybe it would give us a better response. Now, the one thing with the GPT-4 is it is slower, so you will definitely see a bit more of a delay. Okay, it took a little bit of time, but it actually came back with a much better response. So it actually gave me all the details from my document. So it's definitely reading, retrieving the data, which we'd expect. So this all looks good. So let's just pick this one. I'm going to go ahead and say, you know what? I want to book DCL 1007. Please book DCL 1007 for 14 nights starting March 1st. And let's see how that works. All right, took a bit of time, but it eventually came back. There it is. It's asking me some more details. So as I mentioned, the 4.0 model is much better. So it's clearly giving me more details and making me fill out all the information that I need in order to call that function, like my name. And I'll put my name is Randy 123. Let's see here. And it's giving me other details that are also part of the rules. Let me go ahead and do that. And let's see if it books it this time. Okay. Need another people. So we'll say 6 people, no pets. Took a while, but eventually it came back. There's my reservation, got my reservation ID, the check-in day duration, so it's given me a lot better output for this, and I can kind of already tell, since I got back this ID here, that I probably did get a good storage back into my DynamoDB table, but I'll double check it. Let's go ahead and double check that. So here I am in my DynamoDB table. Let me go ahead and refresh. And sure enough, there it is. It's got my date there. It's the correct house. 14 nights. Total cost $1,400, and it got my reservation ID. So there it is. It's all working from end to end. Okay, and that wraps up this particular video. If you found this useful, please like and subscribe and follow. And again, if you have any questions or suggestions for other future videos you'd like to see, please put them in the comments, and I'll be happy to entertain them. Thanks for watching.